Good evening. Hello, everyone. I am Jodie. I'm from Melbourne, Australia, and tonight we are talking about flows, code, not flows versus code, but flows and code. And I'm saying good evening because it's evening where I am, but Ines, it's morning where you are. So please introduce yourself.
Hello, good morning, coffee time. I'm Ines Garcia. I'm a Salesforce MVP and Agile coach. And Daniel, tell us, how is for you?
It's morning here in Frankfurt, Germany. I'm Daniel Stange, Salesforce MVP and technical architect with DIA, an implementation partner in Germany. And we also have Kerry on the call. Kerry.
Hi, I'm Kerry Townsend, also based in the UK, so it's morning for me. I'm also a Salesforce MVP and a Salesforce implementation consultant. I'm going to hand over to Roy as he's just come on camera.
Hi, well, good. Well, kind of morning on my end. I'm Roy Gilad. I'm from Israel, and I'm also a Salesforce MVP. And I have my own company called Arnav. And now back to you.
Hello, my name is Szandor. I'm head of Salesforce development with Apero, a German and Munich-based ISV. I love code. I love flows. I'm a developer by trade, but an admin by heart.
Cool. So we are going to share a screen now. So we'll probably lose our faces on the recording, and we're going to just start to write some things up on a Miro board, and talk about the different concepts of flows versus code and flows and code. I'm going to start with some of the, let's get some of the negatives out of the way first. Some of the objections. Why do people not like flows?
Hard to maintain.
Okay.
Hard to
I
debug.
also think there's there's a beginning element where it's just people don't know much about it yet.
Yeah. And really important thing with flows is we've got to understand that flows is visual code.
Oh yes.
So it is just like coding. It's not
Great.
like just point and click and do nice things. You actually have to have a coder's mindset when you are doing flows. You might have got away with it a little bit in workflows and I want to avoid talking about Process Builder because where we are now, we are like 95% of the way that we can towards being able to ditch process builders. So I really only want to focus on process builders as in we had this thing and it wasn't quite good. Now we've got flows. And so let's focus on flows and workflows and code, right? Where we are right now. If we're starting from scratch right now, what would we build right now? And it's really important that we think about flows as a coder does. And so therefore it's really important for us as coders. Okay, hands up who's a coder and who's a coder? Yes. Coder. Christian.
Well, we can't see your hands maybe, but I am certainly
and
a coder.
who likes more declarative development? Me? Yes.
I'm more declarative, but that's mainly because I don't have a coding background. It's not that I'm not interested, but this is a stepping stone.
Okay, so Kerry, can you talk to us then about your thoughts around how to approach flows?
Well, as you mentioned, it is very much getting into that coding mindset. And I think although not necessarily in implementation, but conceptually, the way I learned that, I actually see it's a way for making code feel more accessible because you can get into the thinking and the logic behind it, but without having to know the detailed syntax. And that's, an area where I'm less familiar. So therefore, that means that code can feel less accessible. Plus, I think around flow, there's probably some more guide rails, i.e., you can drag and drop certain things onto the canvas, and that's what you can do. So you play within those guide rails, whereas code is obviously a blank piece of paper where you can just start with any text and that structure. So it's thinking about that structure and what inputs I need. And when I first started using Flow, I think that was a big difference from some of the other declarative code, is that I needed to declare the variables and think about them being kept in memory. So it's that planning up front, then, you know, the logic, and then how it's displayed, and making sure that the information that you're presenting or the way you're capturing it can then be displayed.
So have you seen in the latest releases of Flow that there is way less need to declare the variables up front? There's only, like in before save flows and after save flows now, a lot of the variables are declared for you already, like the record prior and the record variable. So it actually is a lot easier to get going with that. For me, the very first time I looked at flows, went back in the old Flow builder, the variables was the hardest thing to get my head across.
Generally speaking, Flow has come a great way in terms of usability, especially in the last 2 years, let's say. I'm a big fan of auto layout. The reduce, so the UI has been decluttered. There's lots of clicks I don't need to do anymore. I still find and believe I have to do too many clicks, but that's probably a different story. But it's way easier to get started today than it was 2 years ago.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Fully agree with that. I still find far too many clicks. I just want to be able to tab through things. But it's still is easier to get a set up than setting up code. Okay, so hard to maintain. Can I put in here hard to test also? Can we talk about testing?
Please do, because if we talk about flows and people who are passionate about flows and build their business logic with flows, they need to know, yes, you're dealing with business logic, so with very, very serious stuff. And how do I prove to my client that my flow works the way it's supposed to work? And the current option is to write Apex tests for it, to my knowledge. If there's not been a feature I'm missing, then you can't test flows with flows. You need to write code to test your flows.
Writing test classes is much easier conceptually than writing real code, right? It is, and it does really require you to have. Okay, so I have spent today writing a test class for a flow. Okay, so I'm doing a very complex before save flow, and unfortunately, you can't do recursiveness in before save flows. So I'm also having to do an after save flow on the same record. Okay, just to do some more calculations to get out of calculations that I've done in the before save flow. Need to recalculate them. So there is a hit on the time it takes to save the record, but it's just that it's going to be a hit no matter whether it's in code or in flow. And so I'm writing a test class, and writing a test class is all about the business logic, because you have to put the records in the right order. And you have to get the code in the right order, and you have to get them do the assertions that actually match the business logic. So if a coder has set up a test class for that does test a flow, it's completely irrelevant for then an admin to go in and modify that test class if they modify their flow. So just to say that this blanket thing that flows can't be tested or flows are hard to test, I just can't agree with that at all.
The issue is something else, I believe. The issue is that, as Kerry pointed out, it's an easy access tool to get started, to do your first business logic. But if you really want to test that business logic and make sure there's no way this can fail or there are failovers, then you have to maintain code. And this defeats the purpose, in my opinion. This simply defeats the purpose. things can grow, and at some point an admin might not be able to amend the test class anymore. The thing is, you don't only need a developer's mindset building flows, you also need all sorts of platform knowledge, especially if you then go into test classes and have maybe issues with execution contexts or locked rows, all that kind of stuff that might happen with your test classes. So that's a pain point to me. So I love to enable people to build their business logic via flow, but at the same time, I want to run my business securely and safely in terms of business logic. And then I need somebody who knows how to maintain and test stuff on the platform.
Yep, I agree that there's going to be places where I really need to move to code. But what I'm finding at the moment is also, when process builders came out, is I've got a hook, line, and sinker into the methodology that Salesforce is saying, rebuild everything in process builder. Don't use workflow. Process builder is great. Rebuild everything. It completely failed. The save time went out to about 5 seconds per record. I had to then minimize when things were calculated. It was a complete and utter disaster. And so I've been living with this for 2 years rather than rebuilding it all in code. And so now I'm having to go back and re-architect the whole thing and say, okay, what actually can be done in flow with the new flows? Because this is a business that changes quite regularly. So I actually want to build them in flow because it's easier to change for me, easier to change and modify their processes. And what do I really need to, that is doing the heavy lifting that I really need to bring into code? Now, I can code. I don't like to code, but I do at least know when to code. And so I think the most important thing is with flows is to have your developers and admins working together. I think long has passed that the developers have the keys to the kingdom, and every single bit of business logic must go into code. And if you want any sort of updates, record updates, field updates, record creation, that you must engage a developer, have a developer do that work. So how can we do that? How can we get developers and admins working together?
I mean, I think you make some.
Kerry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, some great points there. I suppose I just want to highlight that conceptually, getting admins and developers to work together is something that we should all aim for and makes this accessible. But then, I mean, there's also a tooling piece, right? Because depending on, and when we talk about how you have flow, which is all done within the UI, but then when you move into development, then the people that focus on that have their own, they use their specific IDE, and that might be consistent in an organization, but maybe it's not if you've got different people coming in. And then if you think about all the DevOps automation tools around that, when you were talking about that, I'm used to working in more an enterprise setting, and I can see some people sitting, maybe doing more of the business logic element in flow, but then actually they wouldn't even have the tooling to be to do the test classes. So then that would be handed over to someone who was potentially maybe offshore, and it doesn't necessarily, in practical terms, in some organizations there's a division between the people that focus on more of the declarative tools versus the coding, and so there's a separate divide there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's again, that's a really good point between the small business and enterprise, because I don't usually focus on that, and definitely not CI/CD. But I use DX in VS Code, and so that we've got to have another discussion about DX and VS Code, right? Or DX and development experience and CI/CD pipelines, and because again, there's so much talk out there that admins can't do Git. And admins can't use DX, right? And so my user group co-leader and I are doing a user group in a few weeks' time is about how to use DX as an admin. So because because I have to do everything, I have to know everything. So
Right.
I have to,
It's-
it is
It's
possible.
certainly a question of size, so and processes. So as soon as you have multiple teams working on an org, maybe there's many more challenges than if you're a solo person doing everything. And we talked a little bit about hard to maintain, and I just want to make sure what I mean by maintaining. I'm not saying that it's hard to change a flow. But if we compare it to code, what I love to do with my team is doing code reviews. And those code reviews are happening in a certain tooling in GitHub. And there's a specialized tooling with that. Also, if you go into more, source-based development, then you will have to deal with flow metadata. Flow metadata is something impossible to review and check against currently. So this also adds to my problems with flow and maintaining flows or many flows, because my whole change process, which is GitHub based, is difficult. So I can read the metadata changes for a field and understand what's happening there. But if I start reading the metadata changes for a flow version, I'm probably completely lost.
So you know that Shun Kasaka in Japan has made a great little plugin for DX that will generate a PDF for but it only works for process builders at the moment. There is a paid app that does it for both process builders and flows. And so then you can basically check in your PDF or check in your actual Word document or XML document, I think it creates, into your source code also, and then do the comparisons between that. So look, there are ways of doing that. But again, that adds a layer to the tooling that you need to have in place also. So let's move on to how to debug. And I want to put performance issues in there too.
Yeah, let me just throw in a thought so that we two things came to my mind just when we were talking. One is it is definitely an issue. Everyone who's not a solo freelancer or entrepreneur has to kind of think of how to enable his or her team to handle these tools. And this is not specific to flow or code. It's also true for process builder, where you have to know certain development-like practices, like checking for null values, unless you don't want to have emails in your post box every day. So it is something about education and a development-like mindset that we have to establish anyway. No matter how easy these tools might be to use, it is a task for people like me who's working in a team or leading a team to do one thing. The other thing is we're talking as flow as the backbone of our business processes mainly. And this is probably not exactly the area where flow might help us the most to make development more accessible. What I see most in projects is that we leverage flows instead of rebuilding the UI completely. And this is the place where it really, really pays off to build things in flow, because you can bring together the power of code and snippets of code and components of UI and bring this into flow. So it's probably not the best area to weigh in code versus Apex or Apex and flow. If you just look at the business processes in the back end, the front end might make even more sense. And this is probably where admins and developers can learn how to work together before they start doing the heavy lifting together. And that's probably the thought that I wanted to throw in just before we go into debugging, because that's what follows when admins and devs work together. And honestly, I saw the debugging options getting much, much better in the spring release, or the announcement of the changes in the spring release at least point in that direction. I have to see this being more helpful in action still, because I'm not so often involved in debugging flows at the moment. But I think there's something coming. But it's still, this is, as soon as you work together, you have to get better insights. And I think Salesforce started to deliver this in parts to us in the current release.
At the moment, before save, flows can't be debugged in the UI.
Okay.
But the
okay, that's what you need most.
but there's some really lovely debugging for well, just the ordinary flows, which just like that have been invoked by something, which is probably Process Builder or been invoked by a button click. Regular flows, flows and screen flows. So I want to switch back to the UI stuff, but I think we do sort of have to talk about performance also.
Right.
Like the Flow UI hasn't been great. You know, it's been a bit basic. It doesn't quite look like the rest of Salesforce. But now with the new layout tools, I think the Flow UI is going to be a lot nicer. Loving Inez's like beautifying of our grid here. It's wonderful. And it's so the new UI I think is getting better. But the thing is, what you can do is you can use the 80-20 rule. You could do 80% of your UI through just regular flow and using the new flow layouts, and then that extra 20% where you really need a good UI component, then put in use your code to create a LWC and put that Lightning Web component inside of your flow. So I think that's a really nice way of doing it. Anyone else got a comment on that one?
Yeah, it requires lots of plumbing from us developer side, and it's boring as hell.
Well, you want to have the full control over everything. You would just want to build an app page in LWC, do you? And have all of the things firing across the different components on the app page.
No, the usual development answer is it depends, right? I'm completely with Daniel saying that there's lots of things to do with flows on UI level, and at certain points you can snap in Lightning Web components or Aura components that do some special stuff. But my heart lies with the before save or after save things. So with the business logic of things, I'm not sure if a developer has. So building a 3 or 4 step wizard means I build it once and reuse it. So just to have the next screen slide and just put it in there with custom components, there's no real gain for us developers, because a clickable wizard is not so much pain to build, right? Yeah. But if you're thinking of admin side, they can't build a clickable wizard, but they might have 2 or 3 ideas and 1 or 2 components that are specially made to work also in flows, right? And that really depends on the business. And I would really love to see the component app exchange to get really flying, and lots of component to be published that I can buy for cheap money to get something done easily or configurable. So the whole, I love the citizen developer, but where's the library for the citizen developer to take out chunks and pieces? And we have the lab apps people who do great stuff, but they do apps and not so much components or flow components currently. Yeah. And I would love to see more of that coming in the future. Right, but again, I'm looking for, okay, how does that pay off for the people building the components? So if you're not like a huge company that can thus do this on the side, then for the developers, how do I monetize my tiny component over time?
Exactly. Is there a recurring revenue model that is behind publishing components? And I think that's the reason why we don't see it fly currently, because there is no such a thing as the ISV market for components. And that's basically death to all business model related initiatives in terms of selling software. Because if you can't sell software for recurring revenue, you shouldn't sell software at all. That's why everyone is turning to subscription-based models and recurring revenue-based models, because it's not sustainable to publish anything and offer service for something that is paid once or paid not at all.
So Kerry, I think specifically on the service-wise specifically, because you need to maintain, enhance it. You know, Salesforce really keep us on our toes with all the releases. So yeah, it's not that you do one app or one component and then you just, retire. One thing I think it may be worth to investigate a little bit more for the viewers is, Szandor, when you were talking about the heavy lifting and all that plumbing that is required to embed LWC into a flow, just give us a few hints. What is that? What are the bits?
Oh, there's no heavy lifting. There's just a little bit of plumbing, copy and paste code that you will always need to do. And then you will have to define lots of properties depending on how many options your flow or your flow configuration component has, because there's two sides. There's the component the end user sees, which might have been built by a developer, but there's also the component I built to configure the screen component. And what I do is basically offer lots of checkboxes and options, and that makes it into a mini product, because I need to think about what options should an admin have, what data needs to be transferred, and if any of these requirements change, I need to add another property, and a coder is again involved. So the handover is, especially over time, difficult to maintain.
Yeah, and then the custom property editor new stuff is great for the flow, and there's some really good examples of that. Eric Smith has done really wonderful things with the custom property editors in his apps. But actually building the custom property editor, it takes a lot of time and effort. And again, you are then building a fully fledged app, because you're going to put a custom metadata type in there. You're going to look up the custom metadata type for all your settings. You're going to, you want to save that back to the custom metadata. So there's so many different components just to surface this LWC into a flow. So it is a bit of work. Yeah. So that's where it's, I still think go with the 80% that you can build in flow by default. And and then there is this middle ground where you can use tools like Eric Smith's grid tool or anything on the unofficial SF site. And I'm going to preface that with be cautious. And in enterprise, look, I know you probably won't be using anything from unofficial SF, but there are some really cool tools on there. And yes, there are a few components on the App Exchange, but not enough. But there are components other people have built that you can put in, and actions, flow actions that you can put into your flows, which are pretty cool. I've done some really cool stuff with those recently.
It's pretty sure only us SaaS people complaining about having to build a user interface for the stuff we are running. It's a very unique situation, actually. So,
Kerry, can you talk about the flow? You use the flow UI side of things in more enterprise level, and how have you seen it work?
Yeah, so I definitely have, because in some settings you might walk into a project and they might have conceptually taken a view that we're going to keep this low code, and that's a place where it clearly fits. Plus there's an element, if you're at least, as we say, using the 80%, that the prototyping element of that means that it's quite accessible up front, right? So that brings it to life quite quickly. And again, in the wizard setting, I think it makes it far more accessible around that. So those are really probably the main areas, particularly to start with. So we called out the contrast of like whether you're using it to purely power your business logic, or whether you're using it more in this wizard approach. And I think when I've seen flow come in, it's definitely been more in that wizard element first. But then also in an enterprise setting, in the majority of the projects that I've been involved with, obviously we've also had the a full DevOps suite doing continuous integration. So there is a natural leaning towards code within some of that and around the efficiency. So again, I couldn't speak to a comparison with efficiency in terms of flow versus code, because I know that that's so much closer and that can be benchmarked. But originally, if you think of where we've gone on this journey with declarative tools, originally everything was process, like there was an initial push for process builder, and it was a combination between process builder and code. And I think a number of people that I know and I've seen firsthand where there was a desire to go to Process Builder and then unearthing the potential difference in efficiency and then the need to refactor into code. So that has also potentially stuck with people in terms of that thing. And I think there's also an element of, like, I would love to see from Salesforce just clear benchmarking that says, you know, for this type of stuff, use this one, and for this type of stuff, use this one, because that's what, like, my perception at least is that, you know, each, maybe even individual team or company is making their own maybe assessments or recommendations, or finding out as they go on a project by project basis to understand which way to go.
Yeah, and that's what I just started, you know, the horror I went through with Process Builder, right? I will never touch Process Builder again if I can avoid it, and I will only be working to remove Process Builder. But yes, I'm really struggling still with the time the time it takes, even with the before save flows. So if we don't know, the before save flows run before triggers now. Before.
Right.
So they should be a lot quicker. It's just like setting the variable in the UI, basically, before you setting the value in the UI. And so it should be a lot quicker. I'm still not seeing humongous gains in what I need to do, because I have to do this, go back and do this after save flow. But I think I'm working on a really complex scenario first up. Right. So I think I'll get a lot more gains in my simple scenarios of just simple before trigger updates. So I just think we're, 5 minutes, we really need to start wrapping up. That my thought for developers and this whole thing about using the flows and code is, we have been burned. We've had a terrible experience with Process Builder. Let's try and work to forget Process Builder. There is none of this anymore. One Process Builder per object. Forget all of that. Forget every single thing that you ever learned about that. Start again. Start with, if I would code it this way, so I have a thing of doing object, a naming convention, which is object, when and why. Okay. So assignment before update, count before update, when active. Okay. So, and I put everything in that does things at that time in the one flow. But I've got assignment before update, always. Everything that always happens in the assignment record always goes into that flow. So it's a real good opportunity to forget that horror that you've been through with Process Builder and really start to think about something new now. So I think if developers can try and sort of say, look, yeah, Process Builder is horrible. This is a brand new world now. Let's have a look at it again. What do you think, Szandor? Are you willing to have a look at it again?
I'm constantly looking at it again, and I'm saying whatever people build as a trigger, like putting a discount on account, should be put on a flow right now. That's the message. But looking into the details, I'm seeing lots of struggle in maintaining, in the sense of, we have processes around code or GitHub or source code around deployments, which still don't really work out with flow, or with lots of manual collaboration and communication.
Will DevOps, we don't know what DevOps, a DevOps Center is about. We've got no idea. It was, released in Trailhead DX last year, I think. Do you think, guessing, do you think this is going to help?
No, because it will only touch the surface of DevOps and certainly not solve the problems of how do I treat flow changes in my metadata repository.
Okay, Roy has been a bit quiet. Roy, do you want to put in anything to finish up on this? Because we haven't talked about bulkification and performance, apart from, etc. But bulkification is a really hard one. I still don't reckon it's bulkified well enough in flows. So
one thing that I definitely would add both on the admin side and the developer side is that being exposed to flow makes the admin more exposed to what the developer's mindset, as we said in the beginning. And the one thing that really comes into mind is about handling bulks, meaning that you need to move, you need to work within loops, and only then, as you mentioned, Jodie, to do the assignment within the loop, and only the call to the database being done only after the loop has been done. So it brings the developer mindset to the admins. It's also so in the bulkification provides. It's hard to teach that. Even when I started off as a developer within the Salesforce community and within the Salesforce ecosystem, and I was a .NET developer before that, it was a change in mindset that I had to do. So admins also need to learn that, and that's another big step into that. Bulkification has improved. You mentioned Process Builder. Process Builder wasn't bulkified. It was a mess. But as Szandor said, in the last 2 years, there was a huge improvement both on the performance side. And, it's really, really huge.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. We can go a few more minutes as a wrap up. So I don't know, have we convinced anyone? I think people will probably convince me not to do flows a lot because of the whole CI/CD thing. And I've really got to think of that because I'm just putting on my small business hat on, and yeah, I can just go ahead and do flows because I'm not going to be deploying anything through CI/CD. But I think that's a really big factor in this discussion that we've had.
Yes, but I also want to add quickly that you also need to think about additional limits that flow have. So there's elements limits, there are certain post-interview limits for large orgs, and building flows upon flows, calling flows might hit new limits that weren't there without using flows. But generally, again, if you want to build something quickly, before save, after save, or on UI level, flow is a perfect valid tool, especially for SME, small to medium enterprises, right? Not everyone needs to have a whole CI/CD chain and think about GitHub or similar. So there's a big chance for SMEs, I believe, certainly.
Yep.
I would say I am encouraged just because obviously like some of the things that we've talked about is just the improvements that have been made in flow and that we're seeing, and that I would assume that we would continue to see that. Yes. So as long as people are talking about the issues around, what they need more visibility on, what they need more support around tooling and all of that it will come with time.
Yeah, absolutely. There is place for it. I think a lot of attention is being given there, and it's empowering to do things that one couldn't do and had to externalize or get other things before. I love them. I used to use them when they were in Flash. So like, it's just so much better, and it's getting better every time. Just in terms of continuous delivery that we have mentioned, there is, yes, there are capabilities and there are tools that can help you, but it's not what is going to enable you to do that. So just 4 things that any team should be measuring today to see where they are. I think it may be worth to mention. One is lead time, right? And that's how long since a task was created to actually went all the way and is used by your users. And yes, cycle time, optimizing that gonna help you, but that's not the only thing there. So measure with your team lead time, measure the deployment frequency. How often do you do it? And chat with your team. How can we do it more often? Because the smaller that you do, it's easier to spot what's wrong or what needs to be enhanced. And after all, things in progress doesn't bring value. Things finished and enhanced of your users do. So value finishing over starting. And then check change fail. So out of the things that you're sending to prod, you're either going to have a pass or a fail. So not almost pass. And so check with your team. What are the things that you can do today to make more passes. And that's a collective learning. And then means to restore once it's failed, you know, how long did it take you in minutes to get it up and running, right? So 4 things, you don't need magic tooling or external God to save you, 4 things that you can measure and optimize today with your team.
Thing where when we only had workflows and process builders came along and all of a sudden we could do record creation in process builder, that was such a game changer, right? And I think if we forget process builder and move process builder out of the way, to be able to do simple things like that still in flow is such a great, still a game changer now, because the level at which we need to involve a developer or engage a developer or bring in a development team is much higher and or much longer in your cycle of getting your whole Salesforce org up and running. So I think flow can really fit in those scenarios around prototyping, around simple getting something up to test it out for a few months before you engage a developer. I'm always telling that for my clients is just let's get something simple up and running, play with it, because anything in putting a Salesforce into your business is going to change the way you do business. So you can't just code your existing processes. You are changing your processes all the way along. So to be able to prototype that and get that up and running really quickly in flow is actually a really good way of doing that, in no matter what size org. But yeah, there's still some issues with flow, but it's really good.
Yeah. While a product is in use, it can only get better. And that's with the things that we build and the things that we use to build this.
Okay. Thank you for this discussion. As I said, we need to have another discussion on DX, and we need to have another discussion on probably CI/CD, and probably many more discussions also. I love these discussions. They're really cool.